This is James Athayanchik, the Black Knight of Talk Radio, inviting you to join me on a road to truth via the path of non-contradiction. Join us each week on Feet to the Fire, a show with the goals of examining a subject matter on its own merits and test how it stands up to the many possibilities found in reality, all without pre-drawn conclusions found in personal bias. No left or right wings here. No pounding the pulpit of ego-driven my way or the highway attitudes. But there are no free passes given either. Answers to questions are important, but equally important is the reasons and methods used to find the answer. The lack of contradiction is the final judge here on Feet to the Fire. Feet. Sunday evenings. To the... How do you listen? Fire. Check out feettothefireradio.com. Now broadcasting live with archives kept in HD video on our YouTube channel and with high-quality audio only at Spreaker.com. The views expressed in the following show are of the host, the guest, and the callers. The content of the following show, its accuracy, authenticity, and the ramifications of the use or application of said content is the responsibility of those speaking and listening, not the broadcast medium. All right, we are back, and we are live. Feet to the Fire. I'm your host, James Athayanchik, the Black Knight of Talk Radio. We're live at the moment, and I'll be doing some commentary on news stories and so on, but coming up would be a pre-recorded interview with Jim Jatras. He's a foreign policy expert run in the East European, Mideast region, and we've had him on several times talking about various countries, the real deal in Syria, on Georgia, North Korea, and so on. And I asked him to, if we could talk about Saudi Arabia, because, you know, there's news coming out of this big crackdown, you know. And some of the stories that are coming out they range from, this is anti-corruption to the absolutely best example of corruption. And then somehow Trump gets in there with the glowing ball saying this is part of an anti-pedophilia ring crackdown. And I mean, from my understanding, Saudi Arabia would be, well, you know, let's say they would be one of the bad guys if I was going to put them into human rights and, you know, child trafficking or whatever. So I was kind of like taken back by this, and I asked him to come by, and he did. We recorded earlier today, and I'll play that later. What I have now is I'd like to comment on some of the news stories. And I mentioned last week there's a trend that is very disturbing to me. They're coming out with these superhero-type stories that's coming on in the background. Sorry, I didn't mean to cough in your face there. That they have, you know, that Trump is playing all this deal with Mueller, and they're really behind with a sting, and there's going to be arrests, and they're citing these sealed indictments and so on. And it's getting a kind of alarming, because it looks to me like, if I had to make my own guess, that it's a disinfo plan to really take these people on a ride and drop them on their head on a cement of reality and discredit the various people who are picking this up and disseminating it. And it's very alarming to me. I was looking, let me see if I can find it here. I was looking, I was looking on Facebook. Let me go to what page? Well, that's not going to work. Let me move this one here. There we go. Oh, it's not there either. There we go. I was looking on Facebook, and I clicked through to this link. They're talking about the U.S. Marines storming the CAA headquarters at Langley Air Force Base in order to secure the, well, I should say secure, to prevent the ongoing coup. And, and I'm reading through the article, and I was reading through, I don't have this Facebook thread. I mean, I could go find it, but it's I don't have to really find it. And these people are arguing for this, and they're basically, yeah, we'll prove it, prove it isn't. And no, you got to prove it is. You don't prove it isn't. I mean, when you have a news report, the news is assumed it doesn't exist until you can prove it exists, if you will. So I'm thinking that this would be so hard to keep under wraps. I mean, you'd have the local traffic would be talking about things, the local people, local TV. Of course, it is near D.C., so it's possibly the TV could be suppressed. A lot of the local radio and TV, though, stuff comes out because they're just reporting on the news. They're not involved in it. But this is really starting to take a life of its own. I did a search, Marines at Langley, and if you notice, a lot of these have the same headlines. He confirmed, and what they kind of are initially a story comes out, and then it's just ping-ponged around by everybody. And, if this was true, if this is going to go in and clean up I'm fine with this. It's funny. I'm not arguing against it because I don't want it. I'm arguing against it because I don't see the credibility in what it is. I mean, and then they're saying because the Marines are on direct control of the president and so on. And while all that's fine and dandy, when you have all of these statements, they're all kind of just, this would be we'll call it the alternative media, the citizen journalist version of what's going on in the mainstream, where they're echo chambering each other on the talking points against Trump and ignoring good stuff. So as I looked around, I see a lot of stories about it, but they all seem to be talking about, and then you see things like Godlike Productions. I mean, these places are they just have, it seems like their goal or their fun is just to come up with stories. So if anybody has any information, I mean, I would like to hear about it. If you want to, while I'm still talking here, you can send it to an email or a chat or something. But all these things just seem to be, and I read one guy, I read it, and I was reading through that. One guy does do a comment on it, and he's rather skeptical, as I think one should be, because this is quite amazing. So anyway, you guys can look at that too. I don't want to keep going on and on about it, but I wonder if I could find the text. I don't think I commented on it, but let me get to some of the stories here. If I bump into it, fine. Here's somebody. I'm going to say something. Oh, okay. Here's a story that's very interesting. Unfortunate. Jim Jatras, by the way, who's going to be on talking in a little bit when I play the tape recording, wrote this. But we're talking about Trump getting rid of trafficking and child sex slaves and all this, which he has said, and I believe him, But here you have the United States military in Afghanistan having to allow these child marriages and boys being dressed up as girls and auctioned off and whatnot. It's pretty bad. And I got links to this stuff. It's, these people, and no wonder these guys are coming back from the military with their heads screwed up. They're coming back after sitting there, fighting for freedom, and actually they're seeing this stuff happening and so on. It's ridiculous. I have an article. I'm looking at the wrong pages here. Hold on. Sorry, there. We have an article of somebody put a hidden camera family member put a hidden camera in the room, record the veteran, World War II veteran, calling for help as he dies. His nurses laugh. Despicable. And you know what? I was lucky when I was in the hospital. I mean, they were really nice, but other times I've been involved in a hospital, they weren't. So this is just creepy. I mean, this has been popping around. You can go find it. You just look for Joe Biden, and he's got all this. He's got this collection of videos of him talking to young girls and stuff, and them getting really awkward with it. And it's just really creepy. What's going on in Alabama? I didn't pay attention. I mean, I heard this stuff. I didn't pay attention to it closely. I didn't come out, oh, he's this, he's that. But my initial reply was, well, there's due process. And, he can run for office. If he wins, fine. If he doesn't, fine. And he can be charged and tried and then removed. I mean, there's due process here. The fact that it's coming out right before the election is very, very suspicious. You can come out anytime you want. When you come out before the election, you're trying to not get him elected, and the people involved are pushing him. But I got a couple of links where they go into detail. I thought his signature in the yearbook was actually a forgery because of initials that he put in there that shouldn't have been there at that time if he would have signed it. So there's all kinds of stuff going on. But clearly, the timing of it, there's so many other things that could have done. Trump, if you recall, when he ran for president, had several people come forward, but they were able to drill holes through their stories. My favorite one was the lady who said he raised the arm that came up between chairs, between the seats in the plane, and groped her thigh. And when they went back to look at the type plane that she was on back when it happened, which was a long time ago, they didn't have, in that particular design of the plane, they didn't have movable arms. In fact, it was divider there. You couldn't have got through. So stuff like that gets tore apart throughout time. So we'll let's see about that. But this Biden thing is really creepy. I mean, it's just creepy. All right, let me get this back over here. Look at this. We're going to do this honest. Bitcoin, 8 Gs. Managed to go to the 8G mark. Here's the link for the last week. If you'd like, last day, if you want to go for the last week. And last month, there's that big dip where it went down almost $2,000. And back up again. And my favorite view, the last year. Wouldn't you have liked to have bought it when it was $730? I actually went back several years and could have got it a lot less, but that was about a $982% return on your investment in 1 year. How's that for a deal? But anyway, I just bring this up as a little note because the other ones, Ethereum, are doing well, doing rather well as well. So it all depends when you got in on the deal. But in the interview you'll hear about Jim Jatras will talk about Moon of Alabama. He likes this website for information, so I put this on the links in the bottom of this show, and you can check it out. I'm going to be checking it out in the future. I am not feeling that well today. In fact, this week was pretty lousy. I think I had some bad soup. I didn't cook it all the way, and I got really sick during the week. And it wasn't Friday, it broke. And even yesterday, it wasn't that great. And I wasn't going to even do the show today. But I woke up this morning pretty good. So I continued to record. But I'm telling you, this has really got to me here. This really, would be the word. Taking its toll, I guess. But I'm keeping. I was introduced to aloe vera by a couple of people who have intestinal problems. One is celiac disease, and she has now resisted not having to have any bit of her intestine removed, where her siblings did. So she has a cocktail of aloe vera and kefir every day. It's what she says, one of the things that's keeping her good, along with staying away from weed in her case. But I don't know. It's not been really good. Got to snap out of this and hang in there. So I actually I covered the basic news stuff I want. I mean, I'm really concerned about this trend here. I think these fake news, the disinfo, the pollution of the news stories are really cranking it up. They're not. I mean, I've heard people talk about being censored on YouTube, and that may be true, but I think you can either block somebody, block the information, or you can pollute the information. And I think this is what the case is. They're going to be polluting it by coming up with these stories which some people so want to believe. And then they keep putting it around, and it keeps them going. And then when reality hits, it will really cause trouble. Excuse me. Man, I'm not breathing enough. So I guess let me get into the interview with James Jatras. It's kind of a grounded interview of what's really going on in Saudi Arabia. So let me see if I can get this set up here and go for that. This time, Saudi Arabia is in the crosshairs, so to speak. A lot of stuff's been going on in the past few weeks. Crackdown and whatnot on corruption and so forth in there, how it goes. I've been reading all kinds of articles on how this is part of Trump's plan to clean up worldwide pedophilia, clean up corruption. And I'm amazed by this because as far as I know, as far as I look at it, that Saudi Arabia are like one of the bad guys, you know, and they're on, quote, our side, the United States side, which, of course, indicates the United States has one of the bad guys. In fact, my thinking is everybody's a bad guy, and there's just who's less bad. But anyway, I was thinking about who I could talk to get some good grounded information on this, both historical and what's going on now. And I thought of Jim Jatras. He was here. We talked about Syria, got some good info there, Ukraine, and also North Korea. So I looked him up, and he was available. Let me just give you a little thing here. Jim Jatras is a specialist in international relations, governmental affairs, and legislative politics. He served 1985 to 2002 as a policy advisor and analyst for the Republican leadership in the U.S. Senate. During 1979 through 1985, he was a U.S. Foreign Service officer with the U.S. Department of State, with service in Mexico, Soviet affairs, and public diplomacy. Jatras' work has spanned a range of legislative, political issues and international affairs, including matters related to foreign policy, international security, human rights, public diplomacy, immigration, international trade and finance, and global terror risk assessment. His expertise is in Belgium, Canada, China, Cuba, France, Georgia, Germany, Hungary, India, Iran, Iraq. We're talking here, Japan, Mexico, Philippines, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Serbia, Syria, Ukraine, United Arab Emirates, UK, and Yemen. Many of those names are going to be brought up today. You can find Jim. I got the wrong page here. There we go. He writes for Strategic Culture Foundation. Oh, what is it? Is it Foundation? Yeah, okay, I couldn't see right. He writes for that as well as other things. We got lists. You'll see them popping up along the way. And, of course, everything we talk about, we'll have the links underneath when I do post this. And I would like to welcome back Jim Jatras. Welcome.
Thank you, James. Good to be back. I appreciate it.
Yes, I as we talked slightly before this, because I didn't want to talk too much. I'm kind of at a loss for what's going on in Saudi Arabia. To me, just on the surface, it looks like a power grab, some site, no big deal. I mean, there's a big deal behind it, but as far as I've seen stories thinking that Trump went there, and this is where we get our little glowing orb deal here. We go back to this. Trump went there, makes some deal about getting rid of corruption and world pedophilia, and then I'm thinking, like, Saudi Arabia, you can marry, 12-year-olds? I mean, there's all kinds of, the women have very poor rights and so on. And then they have stories about him, this is going to be tied in with the worldwide sweep of corruption all over the place. And my head's spinning. I go, I would love that to happen, but you got to give me something. There's no backup. There's no backup at all whatsoever. They just say these statements. So that's why I'm calling you to kind of get us grounded, get some background, history, and what's really going on in there.
Sure. Well, let's just start at the beginning. Just to lay the scene a little bit, I know sometimes we as Americans have this tendency to try to divide the world into friends and enemies, good guys with the white hats and bad guys with the black hats. And that if somebody's our friend, we've got to really go to bat for them all the time. And if they're our enemies, they can't do anything right. And we just need to be, both feet in opposition to them. And frankly, I don't think that's really the best way to approach international affairs. I think it's better to start out with each country has its own culture. It's got, in most cases, good aspects and bad aspects, like every country does. And that what they do pursue are their own interests, and that rather than having what George Washington called in his farewell address passionate attachments to various countries for good or for ill, we're better off accepting that they're pursuing their interests in a way that makes sense to them, and then we should be looking at it with the same cold, clear eyes, saying, okay, and what's in it for us? Rather than saying, oh, these guys are our friends, we need to help them, or these guys are our enemies, we need to stomp on them. We should take a step back and say, all right, we see what these guys are doing, we see what those guys are doing, where do our interests lie? And keep our lines of communications open, keep our options open. When Donald Trump talked about an America First policy, and a policy really of realism rather than fighting all these dumb wars we've gotten into over the last few administrations, I hoped and assumed that's where we would be going here, especially when you think of Saudi Arabia now. This is one of the countries he was actually quite critical of with regard to their connection to international terrorism, to their connection to the 9/11 attacks, and so forth. And suddenly we see his first trip as president going to Saudi Arabia, then going to Israel, and then going to NATO headquarters in Brussels, in Belgium, which, by the way, NATO is something he'd also been extremely critical of. And suddenly, NATO's the greatest thing since red beans and rice. I don't know why Trump seems to have shifted his policy toward how we deal with various countries, especially in the Middle East. After he became president, we can speculate about that, but let's talk about what's really going on now. The key figure in all of what we see in the Middle East, and especially in Saudi Arabia, is the current crown prince who just recently installed himself a few months ago, Mohammed bin Salman. He is the 31 years old or so, son of the current king Salman bin Abdulaziz, who is a doddering old fellow who really is not in effective control in the kingdom. Mohammed bin Salman is the effective ruler of Saudi Arabia. And this is extremely significant in terms of a generational shift. I can remember being an old guy serving on the Soviet desk in the early 1980s under the Reagan administration at the State Department. We used to think of the Soviet Politburo as a gerontocracy, all these decrepit old men running the place. Well, Saudi Arabia is the gerontocracy, decrepit gerontocracy out the wazoo. Let's remember that there's only been the founder of Saudi Arabia, Abdulaziz ibn Saud, who was born in 1875, was the first ruler of Saudi Arabia. And since he died, there has been no other ruler other than his sons. That there have been 6 sons in succession, all brothers or half-brothers. Since then, Salman is the current king, is the son of the first king of Saudi Arabia, as were his 5 predecessors. So we're talking about the most entrenched gerontocracy in the history of, certainly modern history. I wonder if even in ancient history you were to find something as absurd, where for half a century you have the increasingly old sons of the original king who founded this state. Let's keep in mind, too, by the way, for the sake of discussion, that this current Saudi state is the 3rd Saudi state. The first one was founded in 1744 by an alliance between the founder of the kingdom and the head of the Wahhabist branch of Islam, the founder, the Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, whose descendants, the al-Sheikh clan, are the religious authorities in Saudi Arabia that are closely allied with the House of Saud. The first state ended in 1818 with the head of that state, actually literally his head hanging from a gate in Constantinople. The second state went defunct in 1891, I believe it was, under the father of Abdulaziz ibn Saud, who founded the current Saudi state now after World War I. Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, the one who's running Saudi Arabia now, is doing a lot of things. And the question is, what is it he is trying to do? This is often talked about in terms of modernization. He has this thing called Vision 2030, where he wants to change the whole economic structure of the kingdom, root out all the corruption, change it into a state that is more like a normal state as opposed to simply the private property of an extended family with 2,000 princes, all of whom have privileges, all of whom believe they should have a cut of something, as business is done with the very lucrative proceeds from oil and other energy commodities.
Well, I would say that sounds good, right?
In principle, it sounds good. The thing that I don't quite understand, and I don't know where this fits into his vision. Is he really doing that? Does that mean he's going to crack down on the al-Sheikh clan, who are the ones who are the enforcers of this very strict interpretation of Islam called Wahhabism, that the kingdom is founded on, that is really the claim to authority of the House of Al Saud, the royal family itself, and which is also the reason when you mentioned Saudi Arabia being one of the bad guys. Saudi Arabia by far is the #1 state supporter of terrorism around the world. All of these terrorist groups, whether we're talking about Al-Qaeda and its various offshoots, like we see in Syria, like Ahrar al-Sham and Jaish al-Islam and al-Zanki and so forth, they all have the same Wahhabist ideology from Saudi Arabia. ISIS or Daesh, ISIL, whatever you want to call it, has the same ideology. Remember, that started simply as a branch of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. We have Al-Qaeda or ISIS in Libya. We have them in Nigeria, Boko Haram. We have Al-Shabaab in Somalia. All of this ideological software is made in Saudi Arabia, and a lot of the hardware, literally the guns, the money, also comes from Saudi Arabia, that is funded by various people there, ostensibly privately funded, not official funding from the kingdom. But remember, in a private state, in a state that really has no public sector other than the interests of the ruling princes, what constitutes private and what constitutes public? And this is where I get to the worrisome idea of what Prince Mohammed bin Salman is doing. Is he's the one behind the war against Yemen, which is just trashing the place, horrendous human suffering there. He's the one behind the confrontation with Qatar over the ridiculous claim that they're doing it because Qatar is funding terrorism. Let's talk about that just very briefly. Yeah, sure, Qatar funded terrorism, especially in Syria and the Syrian war, supporting the jihadists trying to overthrow the secular government of Syria. And the reasons the Saudis would know that very well is because they were doing it cheek by jowl. Recently, the former Qatari PM, Prime Minister, came out and said, we were working together under Saudi directions with the Americans' approval to send weapons to the terrorists in Syria. That got almost no coverage in the Western media. It was picked up mostly in places like Zero Hedge and here and there. It was and some of the publications in the Middle East. Almost no coverage in the United States that one of the authors of the policy himself, the guy who had been Prime Minister of Qatar at the time, came out and said, "We did this. We and the Saudis and the Americans and the Turks were supporting Al Qaeda and their various offshoots." in Syria, and nobody gives a damn. It's like it wasn't news at all. It's a confirmation of what there have been reports, but it's coming straight from the horse's mouth. So for the Saudis to accuse the Qataris of supporting terrorism is a real, pot and kettle kind of thing here. What they're really upset about is that the Qataris are supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, which is not a nice group by any means, but it's not Al-Qaeda. And the Saudis themselves used to support the Muslim Brotherhood, but they stopped a few years ago after they became afraid not so much of their radicalism, but of their populism. The fact that they have the same radical Islamic ideology, but they think the masses should be ruling rather than these privileged monarchical houses like you see in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. And the other real reason they want to hammer the Qataris is because the Qataris get along with the Iranians. And that's where I think the real worry I have going in is at this point, because the Saudis and the Israelis, particularly Prince Mohammed and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, have a very close relationship. And the one thing they have in common is they really, 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 really hate the Iranians. And especially now that the anti-Assad side in the war in Syria seems to have lost now. And we are seeing what I think it's overblown. I think it's quite overstated, but we are seeing essentially an axis, a political axis anyway, if not a military one, of Iran, Iraq, Syria, and then Hezbollah in Lebanon. And now we also see Turkey sort of breaking out of the coalition they'd been on before against Assad and cooperating with the Iranians, the Iraqis, and the Syrians because they're worried about an independent Kurdish state, which they don't want to see coming into being. There's some real fear now on the part of the Saudis and also the Israelis that they've helped to spawn a monster. Now, I think that monster is not as threatening as they say it is, but I think what they're saying now is we've got to get the Iranians. And who's going to do that for us? Well, how about old Uncle Stupid? That's the usual standby, which is, as we saw in the first Gulf War and when we saw with the invasion of Iraq, that when some of these states in the region want something done, they hype the terrorism threat and say, now you got to come in and do something about it. So for example, we overthrew Saddam Hussein in Iraq. He was a secular ruler, very opposed to the Iranians. In fact, we had supported him against the Iranians during the very horrendous Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s, which consumed, by most estimates, 1 million lives. The Saudis were very happy to support the Iraqis. The Israelis were very happy to sit back quietly and watch them fight, and actually covertly, they actually gave some support to the Iranians to keep some of their American jets flying and so forth. And the reason I pointed out these things is not to blame or castigate or demonize any particular country in the region, but to simply say, this is the nature of politics. These people are looking out for number one, which in their mind is themselves. And the real question is why is the United States in danger, and I think we are in danger, of getting sucked in to another regime change war in the region, this time against Iran, a country that is far more powerful, and that would be far more difficult to conquer than Iraq was.
I shake my head. It's like, I don't know why we're the go-to guys here. And it seems that, and I'm using the term we, meaning the government of the United States or whatever, I seem to be more than happy to jump right in whatever happens. I mean, we're doing it over in North Korea. I mean, how many aircraft carriers are over there? I mean, how many aircraft carriers are there?
I believe there are 3 groups over there now. I forget whether we have 12 altogether or only 11. It's in any case, I mean, you sort of wonder where the political thinking is coming from here. And this is where I get back to as you know, I was during the campaign and continue to be a big supporter of Donald Trump. And one of the reasons is one of the reasons we've got to do something about our trade policies. We got to do something about our borders and out of control immigration. And we've got to do something to not get ourselves involved in wars where we don't have a dog in the fight. And I do sort of wonder, why is it that he did not seem to appoint anybody to his administration who agreed with any of those things? that he has an administration that, if I can use the expression, made up mostly of regular Republicans whose policy prescriptions seem to be closer to those of Jeb Bush, or for that matter, Hillary Clinton, than they were to Donald Trump. I sometimes feel that President Trump has a tiny little candidate Trump inside of him who's fighting to get out. Mm.
Yeah, and the people he did have around him that were on, like Bannon and all those guys drifted away.
Yeah. Exactly right, and of course, the big thing that they're all after him on the whole hue and cry is Russia. He doesn't even dare have a significant meeting with Vladimir Putin, the one country in the world we need to be talking to, because we've got all this hysteria going on about something that honestly I don't think happened at all. No. But we've got all this, you hear people say, well, the Steele dossier, the British spy or supposedly former spy gave to the DNC that seems to have been the genesis of the whole Russiagate thing. They say, well, he got all this information from the Russians, from the Kremlins. I said, maybe he did. I don't know where he got that information from. He says he got it from Russian sources. You mean a British spook with a license to kill doesn't have a license to lie? Maybe he just made it all up, or maybe he made up the sources, or maybe if they're paying him big bucks and they want some juicy dirt, he tells some of his friends to give me something good, and they put some garbage together. We really don't know, but the upshot is that Trump goes off to an Asian summit in Vietnam, and he wants to have a chat with Putin, and his side, the American side, our side, throws as many roadblocks in the way of that as possible, and they have to, sneak off like a couple of secret lovers just have a chat somewhere. It's crazy.
It is absolutely crazy, because a lot of the stuff that they're being talked about in this, I know we're getting off the track a little bit, but
sure, yeah.
When we're talking about this stuff going on in Manafort and all that, it's got nothing to do with the original premise, and they're in there digging.
Yeah.
And it's mind-blowing. And then when they're talking about having an investigation into the Clinton Foundation, Hillary Clinton comes out and says, this is abuse of power. You're on a witch hunt. I'm like, who's on a witch hunt?
Well, there's nothing wrong with the witch hunt if you catch witches, but still, that's, you hear all this all the time. It would be a terrible corruption of the American system to be using prosecutions for a political vendetta. Well, what if it's the other way around? What if she skated only because of political favoritism under the old administration, and all that's really necessary now is to find somebody who can look at it neutrally without political blinders and say, where do the merits fall? So which is politicization? What happened before, or what we're being accused of now if they go after her, which, by the way, I don't think they will. Anyway, back to Saudi Arabia. The other thing we need to pay some attention to is, as I say, because what is driving this is Saudi antipathy for Iran, and I would say supported by Israel's antipathy for Iran and the close collaboration between those two countries. Remember, these are the two biggest lobbies in Washington. They control Washington between them, each one of them, and when they whistle, Washington comes running. Now, again, I would hope with a populist government under Trump, that wouldn't happen, but the default mode in Washington is those are two very powerful voices that people listen to. And if you ask the question, yeah, but what's in it for the United States? Well, apparently the United States has no interests other than those of our friends in the region. So that is very worrisome to me, that either there would be an attack on Iran or some incident stage. The other potential flashpoint is Lebanon. And we've had this curious episode where the Prime Minister of Lebanon, Saad Hariri, who is also, by the way, jointly a Saudi citizen, he was born in Saudi Arabia, was suddenly disappeared, showed up in Saudi Arabia, claimed he had resigned his post, was rumored to have been essentially a prisoner of the Saudis, but then just a day or so ago was allowed to go to France at the invitation of President Macron to say, see, I'm not a prisoner at all. I'm free to go. According to the president of Lebanon, Michel Aoun, who's a Christian. Remember, Lebanon is a very divided societies in sectarian terms. You've got Sunni Muslims, you've got Shia Muslims, you've got Druze, you've got Christians of various sorts, Maronites, Orthodox, all sorts of other things. You've got Armenians, and the Lebanese political system is one that essentially has two components. One is sectarian power sharing. According to the Constitution, this job must go to a Sunni. That job must go to a Shiite. That one must go to a Maronite. This one must go to a Greek Orthodox, and so on and so forth. The other thing is that there are two large political blocs. One is led by Hezbollah, which is Shiite and is pro-Iranian. The other one is led by a Sunni bloc that is pro-Saudi. The Prime Minister Hariri belonged to himself a Sunni, belonged to the pro-Saudi bloc, whereas the president, the Christian president Misha Aoun, belongs to the bloc that is led by Hezbollah and is pro-Iranian. If anything, however, this episode with Hariri seemed to have brought Lebanese from both sides of that divide together to wonder what the hell is going on here, because there's a concern that the Saudis may be trying to somehow blunt the loss of their strategic loss in Syria, trying to overthrow the Assad government, which they consider a pro-Iranian government, and now it's much more pro-Iranian than it was 2011 when they first started this effort to overthrow him, that they can somehow use Lebanon as a new strategic front to attack that line of influence and get the support of the Israelis. Now, the Israelis seem to be playing very cagey here with the Saudis about whether or not they would get involved in Lebanon if the Saudis decide to do something. I don't know how the Saudis themselves can intervene directly in Lebanon anyway. They don't have a common border with Lebanon. They'd have to fly around through Egypt or something. It's very unclear. But that's another potential flashpoint here.
Yeah, I was just looking at an article that had, to me, it sounds like it's propaganda, just on the surface as we're talking here. Yeah, but Bahrain is now saying Lebanon is totally controlled by Hezbollah, which would say that they're terrorists and so on. That sounds like a bunch of
simply not true. Yeah, simply not true. I mean, they have a lot of influence there. It's a major political party. It's part of the government there. But so is the Sunnis, pro-Saudi bloc, very powerful there as well. It's, as I say, it's a very delicate balance. Let's remember that there was a period from the 70s, starting in the mid-1970s for about 10 years when there was a very brutal civil war going on in Lebanon. And I think a lot of people of all different religions and all different political parties don't want to see those days come back. We don't want to see Lebanon turn into another Yemen, which is what we're seeing now. Of course, Yemen is already the poorest country in the region, and it's being racked by a civil war that the Saudis are very much a part of, and directly taking military action inside Yemen, along with some other allies like United Arab Emirates. And unfortunately, they're doing this with very strong support from the United States and with Britain, even though the human cost in Yemen is horrendous.
What's the deal on that missile that supposedly was intercepted from Yemen, which is supposed to be an Iranian missile now and all that?
That's a very good question. There are a few things there. First off, I do have to take a step back with some degree of amazement at the chutzpah here for the Saudis to complain that somebody from Yemen fired a missile at them. Here they are bombing the stuffing out of a neighboring country, and then they complain of aggression if that country shoots back at them. What do you expect to happen when you go trash a neighboring country? Now, a lot of this gets back to how close are the Houthis, or the Ansar Allah is the real name of the group, but they're called Houthis because that's the family name of some of the people associated with them. How close are they really to the Iranians? And the short answer is, I think their connection to the Iranians is much overblown. The Iranians give them some political support. It is claimed that they send them weapons, although other people claim that there are so many weapons in Yemen in the first place that the idea that Iranian weapons are crucial to this is very much overstated, and the Iranians have no easy way to get the weapons to Yemen anyway. So I do think there is some level of Iranian support. I don't know how great it is. As far as their ideological affinity, Shia Islam is rather complex about how many imams you recognize. The Houthis are fivers, the Iranians are 12ers. You've got some seveners running around here and there, but it's not like they're real cozy when it comes to their common religious or ideological views. But the Houthis don't particularly like getting bombed by their neighbor Saudi Arabia, when they're already kind of a basket case of a very poor country. You've also got the fault lines within Yemen. Remember, for a long time, Yemen was actually two different states, North Yemen and South Yemen, which is odd because the capital of North Yemen is actually south of the capital of South Yemen, but that's another story. During the Cold War, North Yemen was on the same side as the Saudis and the United States, whereas South Yemen was on the same side as the Saudis, the Soviet Union. But they were then later reunited. But those fault lines still exist. Besides the Houthis and the Saudi forces there, you've got Al-Qaeda, you've got ISIS, and as often has been the case with this kind of destabilization and intervention coming largely from Saudi Arabia, it just creates an opening for more of these radical forces that, like Al-Qaeda, which I don't think is accidental. I think they look at them as a policy tool. It reminds me of in September 2015 when David Petraeus testified in front of the U.S. Senate, and he said in so many words, we should be supporting Al-Qaeda in Syria because they would be a useful weapon against the Assad government.
I noticed something. They say that, for example, they talk about Yemen shooting a missile, and we looked at some of the headlines. They had a missile on it. But when it comes to Israel, and I put let me get this on the screen. Yeah. I did a search for Saudi Arabia bombing Yemen. Here's the title: Saudi Arabian-led intervention. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
You know, so it's okay if they bomb; they're intervening from some horrible thing. And so I just see this wordplay around, and it's like, tell the dead people what the difference between the two is.
Exactly, and back to what you were saying about the missile. Okay, so fine then. This missile gets shot from Yemen towards Saudi Arabia. It doesn't cause any damage. It's then they look at it and say, the Americans have looked at it. It's an Iranian-made missile. All right. Does that mean that the Iranians shot the missile? Does that mean the Iranians supplied it in the first place? There's a lot of weapons sloshing around the region. It sort of reminds me of the airliner that was shot down in Ukraine in 2014, the Malaysian airliner. They say, well, it seems to have been shot down by a Russian-made missile. Well, maybe so. Everybody's using Russian-made missiles. The whole area is full of Russian-made weapons. I know, in a way, it kind of reminds me of some of the claims about the hacking here. Well, it must have been the Russians hacking it because it was a Russian code software. Oh, duh. There's a lot of Russian code software around. Next thing you'll tell me, if some guys rob a bank and they drive away in a Volkswagen, they must have been German.
I did a thing on my show here where I have my own servers to do everything. And I go in there and look, and I get a report on hacking attempts. And this is just simply a hacking on a particular port. There's one port at all the possibilities, and it gives me a list of what it is. So I went through, I let it go before the show for a day. And I had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hack attempts. 4 came from Russia. 500 came from China.
The Chinese are very enterprising.
So, first off, my point was I get hacked by Russia. But it's not Russia. Sure. It's coming from a Russian IP, which we now know that can get spoofed. But let's just say it was.
Sure.
You got some guy in Russia trying to hack something. It doesn't mean Russia is hacking. And if anybody's going to get blamed for hacking, China actually hacked into the United States and got a bunch of information. Yeah. So, I don't know.
Well, that's exactly right. And again, digressing a bit, if you look a little bit about all this hue and cry now coming from the Senate to that hearing they had a week or so ago from the guys from Google, Facebook, and Twitter, essentially demanding them to censor their own medium here to make sure they get rid of propaganda. And how do they identify what's Russian propaganda? Where's the IP address? Is there Cyrillic in the code? Things like that. They have no idea who's placing some of this stuff, and they want to basically start shutting down the access to independent information. So you only get to believe what's on CNN or is published in the Washington Post and has been authenticated by Snopes, PolitiFact, and whoever the other ones are. And I think it's very worrisome.
Well, but back to the crackdown, as it's being called. I just read a story, which I don't have here. I guess I'll look for it while you're talking. But they talk about they're supposed to be able to allow these guys who are arrested freedom for a huge portion of their wealth. Is that? Yeah,
I've heard the number $800 billion. That is the size of the shakedown, which makes you wonder, is this a crackdown on corruption, or is this the biggest corrupt enterprise in the history of the galaxy? I mean, if you can shake down people for $800 billion, that's a pretty good deal. That's a pretty decent piece of change, even by Saudi standards. Who is it? Reportedly Prince Bandar, the former ambassador to the United States, has been arrested. Al-Walid Ibn Talal, one of the biggest shareholders in many international companies, was arrested. A couple princes reportedly were killed trying to flee the kingdom. Their helicopter crashed, was shot down. I don't know. A lot of this wealth has been simply sucked up. Now, does this mean that maybe Prince Mohammed really is trying to crack down on corruption? And how do you define corruption in a society and a social and legal structure that's based on private interests in the first place? And how do you what then is he going to use the money for? He says he wants to use it to modernize the kingdom. He's going to let women drive, but only if they're 30 years old and of a certain age. I mean, 30 years old and not for a few years yet. Plus, there's a whole problem is how are they going to drive if in most cases they're not allowed out of the house without a male escort. So all sorts of other little issues like that.
Yeah, it's insane to have these guys be the big buddies in the Midwest in Mideast, and yet they have it's so easy to list down human rights problems.
And look, I'm maybe cynical enough or of enough a realist to say if it were truly in our interest to do this, and I'm not sure it is, given how they're the biggest supporter of terrorism around. If they're really in our interest to do this, maybe you bite your lip and say, well, that's the way they are. Well, I don't know if you saw a report the other day. Again, very little pickup in the mainstream media. The Inspector General of the Pentagon released a report that our forces in Afghanistan are, as a matter of policy, looking at the other way, at the quaint cultural practice they have in Afghanistan called bachabazi, which means boy play, which is essentially grown men who do not think of themselves as homosexuals take as their sexual playthings underage boys. And there's a whole culture around this where the boys dress up as dancing girls and entertain the men, and then they bid on them who gets the boy for the night and that kind of thing. And this is an accepted part of Afghan society, particularly in the Pashtun regions, mostly in the western part of the country, areas where the Taliban is very strong. But a lot of the people whom we're working with in Afghanistan, a lot of whom were ex-Taliban, by the way, or maybe are still Taliban, engage in these things, and they're very blatant about it. And the Americans have been told, essentially, our service personnel, just shut up, ignore it. This is their culture, multiculturalism in action here. And it makes you wonder, so what the hell are we doing there? Making the world safe for pedophilia? Yeah, I mean, this relates to your question early on. Is what's really behind this whole thing in Saudi Arabia some big, massive global crackdown on pedophilia? Well, not from the looks of Afghanistan, it ain't.
No, it looks like I'm reading the book right now. It's an audio book, The Big Lie. Mm-hmm. And where am I now? I lost you. Here we go. The premise of The Big Lie, going back to Hitler, is you lie. You say this big thing. You say like the opposite almost of what you're doing. Yeah. People believe it, and then you accuse your other people of doing the thing you're actually doing. You know, kind of. We're cracking down on pedophilia, and actually we're cracking down on anti-pedophilia. from this type of stuff.
And who really knows? I mean, again, you can say this about heroin cultivation in Afghanistan, which remains at record levels. Some people, and I'm not willing to make this accusation, but some people say, this proves that the CIA is really in the drug business. And that's why we went to Afghanistan, so they can run all these lucrative heroin and opium rackets coming out of Afghanistan. I don't personally believe that. But, given how much dishonesty there is going on, sometimes I think, like a lot of people, I don't know what the hell to believe anymore.
No. And I've been on this show the last couple of weeks, I've been doing, personally, I've been talking out about the information that's just popping up with no backup. Yeah. But it's liked. The people who it's aimed at want that. I mean, I want some of this stuff to be true, right? I would love it to be true, but when you look at the background, there's nothing there. And then when you start to look at, one guy was getting really aggravated, and he put up a whole list of over 200 plus references. They're all of the same headline.
Yeah.
This guy's pulling the same headline that guy's pulling, that guy's pulling. That's not.
And that's a hazard, of course, and that's why I think you need to triangulate. This relates to something I wrote recently about this recent decision by the Justice Department to force RT, the TV network, Russian-supported TV network, to register as a foreign agent. Something they don't do to BBC and Deutsche Welle and the France 24 and all the rest of Al Jazeera, all the other foreign networks, the Chinese CGTN. And I guess my view is this, hey, we don't live in the days of Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in America anymore. That a lot of Americans look at what they see on CNN or the three networks or in the New York Times or the Washington Post and say, what a bunch of liars they are. I don't trust anything those people say. They talk about fake news. I consider them the fake news. But then what do you match it against? And I think it's very valuable to have non-U.S. sources of information. I think it's very valuable to have all the kind of things you find on the internet, some of which are complete garbage, some of which you don't know if it's garbage or not, and some of which you say, that has the ring of truth to it. You have to triangulate. You have to compare things. This is what they used to do in the old days in the Soviet Union. They had their official media, which they knew were full of lies, but you had to sort of, pick out the pearls of it and try to figure out what's really going on. You had listened to the foreign broadcasters from abroad, and then they had what they called samizdat, which was self-publishing, illegal publishing, where people would publish underground publications. And you would compare the different sources with a high degree of skepticism, but don't accept anything from anybody on faith. And I think that's basically a healthy way to approach it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, use a lack of contradiction is kind of the guide. You find, let the things kind of line up. Yeah. And if it sounds too good and there's nothing to back it up, it probably is.
Well, let me give you another example. There's a site called Moon of Alabama that I go to sometimes. It's a very good site, in my opinion. And I don't know how many of you have been watching the news over the last couple of weeks that there's been a big brouhaha between the United States and the Russians over a report on the gas attack in April in Syria that Donald Trump hit a air base there with cruise missiles in retaliation. And you hear on our news, there has been a UN finding that the Syrian government was responsible for this attack. No other details. What they don't tell you is that it wasn't, quote, the UN, it was a working group, the Joint Investigative Mechanism, which was authorized to conduct an investigation. This is called the JIM, not me, but that JIM, the JIM, Joint Investigative Mechanism. And what you don't find out on any of our news reports is that this investigative team never went to the place where the attack occurred and conducted no investigation there. They claim that you can't do that because, well, it's controlled by al-Qaeda, which also should ring some alarm bells that this took place in a place controlled by al-Qaeda, which would have had an incentive to stage a false flag, and that the samples that they examined were actually brought there by sources close to the anti-government al-Qaeda affiliated rebels, and their chain of custody could not be established. Now, how do you conduct a gas investigation if you don't go to the site and you're looking at samples, the provenance of which you have no way of knowing how genuine they are? You don't find those details. And in fact, the reason I refer to that site is on Moon of Alabama, they actually had the Jim report, the official report from this group that was being referred to in all of our media, but nobody had the thought to provide. It was apparently being kept under close hold, and I know that through some of my contacts, even some of the national missions at the United Nations hadn't seen the actual report. They were actually going by what the media were reporting. So you really do wonder what you need to do to find authentic fact-based information, and not just sort of accept whatever somebody says on CNN tonight.
Well, and where does this leave us then with what's going on over there? I mean, it looks like a mess, and there doesn't seem to be any good kind of like possibility for that matter.
Well, as far as the Iranians and the Saudis, I'm reminded of the observation of that great philosopher Sarah Palin, who said, "Let Allah sort it out." If they've got, look, if they want to fight their version of the 30 Years' War when Protestants and Catholics killed each other, except that Sunni and Shiites, I think that would be a terrible, terrible thing. I don't know why it's our fault or why we need to get involved. I don't know why we have to go grab some glowing globe in Riyadh. I'm amazed they opened an anti-religious extremist center in Riyadh, the ground zero of religious extremism. It reminded me of. They should have opened an anti-genocide center in Berlin in 1942. That would have had a lot of credibility.
Yeah, well, I don't. I like the idea of let them work out their things. Now, is oil the elixir or why everybody's interested in this area?
I think it's why supposedly we're interested. You remember, it was Jimmy Carter who first declared the Persian Gulf as an area of vital American national interest. The thing about that is we were dependent, or as we found out in 1973, we were dependent on Middle Eastern energy at that time. We're not dependent on it now. Not only are we a net producer and net exporter of energy, the energy we get that we import comes from places like Nigeria and Venezuela and Canada. A lot of it comes from Canada and Mexico. We don't need Middle Eastern energy. Now, certainly a lot of other countries do, like Japan and China and others, and whatever happens there will affect the price of energy. And of course, we know energy prices have been quite low for some time now. And to which I guess my answer would be, well, if the Chinese or the Japanese or whoever it is need to establish, maintain their energy pipeline to the Middle East, maybe they ought to go do that. Why is that our problem?
Well, I don't have an answer for you, but the funny thing about this is it just seems like you say, one of the reasons why I voted for Bush, there's a Freudian slip there, was not to expand the wars. So my three core things that I started was the Obamacare, lower taxes, and don't expand war, and not doing great on all three. Now, I realize he can't do it all, but
sure.
He's running against the Democrats and Republicans on a lot of these issues, but so I'm a little bit saddened by the
and maybe there's a rope-a-dope strategy here. Maybe after he gets in office and he finds himself surrounded by all the swamp critters that he really can't just wave his magic wand and get rid of. Maybe he somehow feels he needs to sort of go along with them, but not actually do anything. So he'll talk the talk, try to wrap it up in more of a populist candy coating of rhetoric, but not actually take the fatal step of launch a war against North Korea or launch a war against Iran. I hope that's the case.
Yeah, I do know he's a businessman. He's a successful businessman.
Sure.
And so a businessman is not necessarily an ideologue. So when he goes in there and I want these things and he sees it's not going to happen the way you want it to, he's going to be like, okay, well, what can I do here? Because he still wants to make a deal and move forward. He's going to be a little more, I guess, willing to compromise in order for the big step forward that some of the supporters maybe wouldn't.
I hope that's right. I wonder if part of his vulnerability and what I see is just some bad staffing decisions is also because of his being a businessman, where he tends to think in terms of, well, who's the really smart guy who knows about this stuff? Who's been very successful in this field? We'll put him in charge. And hiring a Secretary of Defense or a National Security Advisor is not like hiring a manager at a hotel. Just being successful in your field isn't necessarily a big plus if success means basically going along and being an architect of some of the policies that have been a mess for the last 30 years.
Yeah. And, of course, who makes money in this would be the military complex, industrial complex, because they don't care who you bomb as long as you use bombs.
There are a lot of McMansions around here in the Washington suburbs that money doesn't grow on trees.
Mm. Well, I tell you, I appreciate you coming by and giving us some grounded information. I mean, it's nice to project out models of what we would like, and everything. But then the problem is, hey, I'd like it to be this way, and then you start cherry picking out information and plugging it in, and you build this house of unreality, and then reality always wins. And when reality hits unreality, it's not pleasant.
Yeah, that's right. And well, let's keep our fingers crossed. Let's just hope that the president is staying true to what he said he was going to do, and that however much it seems that rhetorically he's sort of wavering, and how much he may be under pressure from various elements here in Washington especially, or foreign influences and so forth, that he keeps his eye on the ball. Because my fear is, if we do go down the road of one of these big wars, or even a small war that we don't need, you can kiss make America great goodbye, reindustrializing our country goodbye. That you can't go around dropping $1, $2, $3 trillion here and there on wars you don't need and still hope to come out ahead. And I'm even afraid that some of these people actually might want to sucker him in to one of these wars and say, gee, we told you he was crazy. Let's invoke the 25th Amendment and get rid of him now.
Yeah, the 25th Amendment thing is funny. I worry about that. Because you talk to people about, we got to impeach him, and I say, why? Yeah. Well, he's not fit for office. Why is he not fit? Well, he's on his tweet talking. I go, no, he's got to be doing something wrong. Yeah. There's got to be a reason. I don't like you. Exactly, it's not a reason to, pull him off. And then, the Russian hack and the Russian intervention, he shouldn't have been elected. Yeah. I mean, even the best reading of that is that the Russians put out this hacking information, which they never said wasn't true. Yeah. Which then people turned the way that they were going to vote. I mean, that's so inane to put that as your reason. But anyway.
Yeah, and I know that you've seen the reports that Bill Binney, a former staffer, I believe, with NSA. Met with Mike Pompeo, the CIA director, at Trump's request, because Binney claims, and again, I'm not a specialist in this area, that if you look at the hard data, the DNC emails could not have been taken out by a hack, an outside hack. It had to have been downloaded at the speeds it was downloaded by somebody with inside access.
Locally, because it was too fast. The internet wouldn't be allowed to go across the world.
I don't know if that's true or not, but he says it's true. Now, a lot of people jumped all over Trump saying, oh, no, he's having Pompeo meet with his conspiracy theorists, because, of course, anything that doesn't match what the mainstream media says is a conspiracy theory. That's how you discredit it.
Yeah, well, I know. Well, again, I'm glad we have people like you around that can come in and kind of put things back on the ground.
Thank you.
Give us both
appreciate
hope.
The opportunity.
You give us a little hope, but you also lay the cards out so we know what we're seeing, so there's no surprises, really.
Thank you.
It is very complicated, and I appreciate access to you, and we will talk again when something else bad happens.
Great.
We'll talk again later.
I appreciate it. Let's hope for the best.
All right, we'll keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Greetings and welcome, my dear and beloved friends. I say beloved friends due to a reference to love, the race, and hope this causes your deductive and inductive awareness to make a connection to the idea of a mirror in, say, a metaphysical fashion, metaphysical context for those of us who share an interest in such things. Let me start off with, talk about paying attention, the name Soros. Notice anything about the name? Think. Come on. Should be obvious. Maybe it's hiding in plain sight. It's a palindrome. Some might have to look that up. I doubt that's an accident, and I could talk the occult relationships of palindromes and such, but not now. As you may notice, I'm wearing my Patriot shirt today, and I seem to wear it on a lot of, if I'm not wearing the teal shirt, on a lot of these broadcasts. And really, it's not because I don't change my shirt. It is because I'm a Patriots fan, and they usually play on Sundays, and today is Sunday, the day of the broadcast, and so I usually dress before I go out into my day. I don't usually do it later. If you aren't one who goes to a post to see the ideas presented, and there are those of you as well, I'll give you a synopsis of the last one because it's both informative and amusing and might prove useful to some. A friend said to me very recently, "You know I love you, right?" "Sure." "How?" I said, "How can you help yourself? How could you not love me?" The person took it a certain way and said, "Well, you're a piece of work." I said, "It's the end result of the fact that I love you as well." Then I shouted, "I hope this gives you some context." You see, certain certainties or certitudes, how can you help it? Could sound arrogant, and in many cases would be, but not in all cases. Love, real love, confers certitude in so many ways. I highly recommend the search for and the possession of true love. And what is the most expedient way to achieve this? Love the ineffable with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. This is one of the main reasons that it is called the greatest commandment. Oh, so I should show you now, in case before I forget. Can I do it? Actually, there we are. I'll try to get an angle here. There we are. That is a fiberglass split, I suppose. I broke a couple of bones in my foot. Unless someone comes and says that I'm, well, I'll say the holidays are near and I'm trolling for donations. Anyway, if the ineffable wants me to have donations, he motivates people to send it to me. If he doesn't, he doesn't. And that's where it all rests and remains. I do not go through any theatrics in order to generate this, okay? I thought since I did have a new injury, well, hey, what a perfect time for that. But anyway, I do have a broken foot, and I suppose it'll stay broken for a little while. I'll find out Monday. And, well, I was being foolish. In other words, I wasn't paying attention. And so I injured myself. But to be a lesson to you, Visible, lest I forget also, greetings from the Arcturian Brotherhood and the Sirius Cluster. I find that I need to state that this is not the result of any New Age channeling, okay? Because all of us do this. Who and what are we channeling? Keep in mind that we are living in and representative of that consciousness, whatever it may be. And so it greatly behooves us to channel that which is representative of the consciousness exemplified in the greatest commandment. If you engage in certain practices, then the mind behind the intention and objective of those practices is informed of and aware of you. This can be either very good or very bad, and also an expression of some part of all the parts between the extremes, depending on you. Depending on whatever. Where your heart is, there your fortune also will be as well. Oh, there it is. Voila. Most of us have a very pedestrian understanding of love, not to mention a very terrestrial version as well. They both basically mean the same thing. The more pedestrian something is, well, pedestrians walk on the ground, right? They're closer to the earth, and then materialism, and I guess I'm pulling together all sorts of things here, and but of course that's your job. So when you listen here, I'm not always being like, hey, what are you doing here? I'm not always being, off balance, don't know what I'm talking about, although sometimes that's the case. No, this is not what's going on. A lot of the time I'm saying certain things specifically because I want them to be heard, but maybe I'm not saying them with the right emphasis, like some evangelical preacher, Jesus! I'm not doing that kind of thing, and sometimes it's tongue-in-cheek, but still very dead serious, and especially considering that I might keep you from being dead. So, and maybe some people are already dead but still walking around, and there's another thing we try to deal with here, okay? So, hopefully, people see pedestrian and terrestrial and that kind of thing, and then try to embrace a more spiritual, metaphysical awareness and perspective of observation. Whatever window you're looking for determines the landscape you see, right? If you go to another part of the house, another room, that would still be the same thing, right? Yeah, or another window is what I meant to say. You're going to see an entire different portion of the landscape. And this world is filled with people looking through one window, arguing with people who are looking through the other window. It's the three blind men and the elephant again. So the dog is here harassing me, Donovan, because he wants some food. He ain't going to get no food at the moment. I'm giving you food instead. Well, I hope that it is nourishing in some regard for those of you who are thirsty for the things that I am thirsty for, and I try to share with you the fruits of my pursuits. Ding! I'm now a rap artist. Love is beyond all comprehension and understanding. Well, beyond that of all but a very, very few of us, and possibly beyond all but one of us, and possibly even beyond the ineffable itself, himself, herself. Because the Lord doth loveth mysteries, and especially unraveling them, and especially unraveling them within the minds of those pursuing the ineffable. So the ineffable will hide things from himself, just as he has hidden us in many regards, and then he'll go looking. And so this adds him some excitement and whatever, because eternity is a long stretch of time, and it could get kind of boring if the ineffable doesn't find ways to keep himself entertained. And of course, his ceaseless meditation upon all of existence is what keeps it where it is in the first place. So he's pretty much busy all the time, but he's not like us. There's a lot more to him. So he might well limit his understanding and awareness so as to always have the possibility of marvelous discovery available. And I think that's probably the case. Yes, ideas like this cross my mind quite often, but I take no credit for them. If you think they're worth remembering, because every useful and valuable thought that I have been gifted with is gifted to me by the giver of all good and wonderful things. And as a result, it's not the result of my efforts, except my efforts to perform the greatest commandment. You see, and that is often when certain things will come to my attention. The ineffable points them out to me. They're not something I come up with on my own, even when it looks, I must have come up with this on my own. I don't come up with anything on my own. But I like to hope that all that I come up with is a result of the ineffable in me and not of any other influences. Well, may the divine bless and encourage us in this pursuit. There are a number of qualities of the Almighty which are beyond the experience of most of us unless we have been raised to a particular level of awareness. Take reason, for instance, as it is known and experienced by the divinely inspired. Consider compassion in the same way, humility when it comes to what is necessary to possess it in order to possess it or be possessed by it in a divine fashion. As is the case in nearly every case, it takes the ineffable to make possible the human experience of the divine and the divine's qualities, which could well result in our being transported beyond the parameters of what defines us as human. Well, my dear and wonderful friends, boy, that went by quickly. We've come to the end of yet another broadcast, and you will see me next week if there is one. In the meantime, I implore you to study and perform the greatest commandment. I think that's pretty much all you have to do, really, and you'll avoid violating any of the rest of them either. That said, greetings, my dear friend, Lord Ganesh. Om Amitabha. Much love, Lady Nature. Alhamdulillah. Nicham Anbu, Guru Baba. Hare Krishna. Hail, Lord Jesus Christ. Carry on, Baha'u'llah. Aloha and Haru. God bless and inspire you, one and all. I mean that from the deepest and most sincere part of my being. I hate to leave, but the games are coming on. No. I have to be about other duties. And besides, I'm limited, and I only get 12 minutes, and we're over that now.